We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello, welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special edition, we're covering everything that happened in the 2024 election, from where Kamala Harris went wrong to where Donald Trump went right, and everything in between. I'm looking forward to it. Let's get started. The electoral dust settles. What does this mean for the country? Well, that's a question we're going to be asking and hopefully answering on this edition of Liberty Nation Radio. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're very fortunate to have with us one of the finest political minds in the business, Liberty Nation senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner, who also happens to be a long-time host of this here radio show. Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
So, Tim, let's start off. Donald Trump has secured a convincing electoral college win. There are, at time of recording, there are still a couple of states outstanding, but either way, he's 300 electoral college votes. The popular vote looks to be heading his way, even after they've accounted for the other 45% of California, which of course won't impact the electoral college vote in any way. He's got the House and he has the Senate with an improved majority, and the House is, at time of recording, it's still a bit up in the air. But what were your first thoughts when the blue wall started to crumble?
Well, I'm going to go back to something you and I have discussed at some length in the past, which we call the 3-point factor. And we discussed this last week, and I pointed out that in 2016, they undercounted Trump voters by 3%. In 2020, they undercounted Trump voters by 3%. And they did the same thing this time. So going into what was supposedly a razor-tight race, there's a virtual dead heat for the popular vote. And what did Trump wind up with? A 3% advantage in the popular vote. They were not able ever to get a hold of properly quantifying Trump voters. Absolutely. And there's so many headlines out of this. But with the popular vote in Trump's column for the first time in his 3 runs for the presidency, and the first Republican to win the popular vote since George W. Bush in 2004, 20 years ago, the left can no longer say, well, he lost the popular vote, he's an illegitimate president. They can't say, well, we're going to challenge in some of these states because it's close enough that maybe a recount will turn it around, which of course they never do. But there was a very big difference from 2016 when there were riots in the streets and the Women's March with all kinds of, shall we say, offensive images of what
that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. And, they said, Madonna got up there and said, I feel Hitler in the streets here of Washington, D.C. This time, they simply went home and buried themselves in their own anguish and depression because the outcome was so clear and so one-sided. It even surprised me. And as you know, I was hinting throughout the election cycle that this was Trump's to lose, and that I didn't buy the idea that it was a razor-thin margin between the two, and that turned out to be completely true. And now the Democrats, they're in a position similar to the Republicans after 2012, when many overly optimistic Republican and right-leaning pundits were saying that Mitt Romney was going to win. And of course, he lost badly, and they were left to the Republicans with really no leadership at all in their party until Donald Trump came along in 2015 and took the party by storm. And now what he's done, Mark, is really remarkable, something nobody's ever done, which is one person has forged a realignment of the two major political parties in the country. Who would have thought even 10 years ago, or when Mitt Romney ran in 2012 and was accused of being a plutocrat who only protected his his rich clientele and the wealthy across the land, that here we are 12 years later, and the Democrats are the pro-war party of the elite, and the Republicans are the anti-war party of the working class. And this is the work of one single man, Donald Trump, who I think now I can rightly call him a force of nature.
Very true. I thought you were going to say President-elect Donald Trump. Former President and President-elect Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's a little hard to know how to refer to him as the former and future president. I guess that's the way to put it. The one-time and future president.
A lot of people are bandying about the book name by T.H. White, I believe it was, which is the once and future king of the Arterian.
Yes.
Things. Now, you really bring up an important point there, that it was one single person who very much his first term, even much of his own party was against him once he became the nominee. But who is in charge of the Democratic Party today? Because it's not Kamala Harris. She's not their standard bearer anymore. Joe Biden is, I think this is fair to say, he is, with all due respect to him in the office, he is the lamest of lame duck presidents as of November 6th. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is destined to be just Minority Leader Schumer, assuming he keeps the role, which I presume he will. The House is still up in the air at time of recording, but based on crunching the numbers for each individual House seat remaining, it looks like, and this isn't a prediction, this is just based on where the polls are, so where the vote count is and who has the advantage in the remaining seats, it looks like 220 for the Republicans. So
which would be their exact margin
yes.
heading into the election.
Yes.
And of course, the important thing is, they want to roll up the number beyond 220. But actually, in the House, surprisingly enough, because most people vote down ballot the way they do at the top, especially in a bitterly divided nation. But Democrats writ large have overperformed in the House races. They've overperformed the Senate candidates, and they've really overperformed compared to Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. So this is an important story now, the House, because having a trifecta for Trump means one thing, but having a House that will stall his every legislative initiative is quite another. And so rightly now, most of the attention should be paid to the outcomes in the House. And unfortunately, in California, they still haven't figured out how to count the vote in less than several weeks or months. Good. So some of these races in California may not be decided for quite some time. So there may continue to be a good deal of uncertainty as to whether the lower chamber of Congress will be in the continuing control of Mike Johnson and the Republicans, or Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats. But either way, any way you cut it, the party is rudderless now, the Democratic Party, without any leadership. The circular firing squad has commenced its work in the Democratic Party, with everybody pointing fingers at everybody else. This usually happens after an election, but there is no sort of anchor for Democrats now. Their ideology has been completely discredited by the electorate. And so they're not only going to have to find a leader, but they're going to have to do an awful lot of navel gazing and decide if they want to continue spending their time trying to impeach and attack and gin up phony scandals against Donald Trump, or if they want to take a look in the mirror and figure out that just about everything that Biden and Harris did over the last 4 years was what contributed to the outcome on Election Day.
We're going to examine that question after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.